turning now to some very troubling escalatory things that were happening before the so-called Trump taco. Again, let's not forget that it may not be a real taco. Let's start with B1. Let's put this up here on the screen. A very strange situation with a alleged strike on Diego Garcia.
Attempted strike.
Attempted strike, yes, sorry. An attack on a base 2,500 miles away from Iran. The Wall Street Journal saying it signals more aggressive military posture for the regime. Iran brings Europe into range with missiles that were fired at Diego Garcia. We have a map just to show you all exactly how far away and the distance that it would be. It would be the longest IRBM that has happened so far in the war. A lot of people were using it as evidence of why we had to attack Iran in the first place, because it's like, oh my God, look at these madmen. They have long-range ballistic missiles. But there are still some very strange indications around the entire attack. Let's put B2 up there on the screen from the NATO Secretary General. The NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte says, quote, the alliance cannot confirm Israel's claim that missiles targeted Diego Garcia were Iranian intercontinental ballistic missiles. The other thing to note is that you really are not exactly aware of the leak, because you have Israel allegedly claiming the strike from Diego Garcia. The Brits have been very cagey about it. There's been some anonymous leakage that happened to Reuters and a few others, and people are taking it as fact. Now, you could take that explanation a variety of ways. It could be the Iranians don't want to acknowledge the strike on Diego Garcia because, like they said, it would show some of the powers that they not previously had said that, had not previously indicated that they have. I'm not really sure why that would be. I would want to claim it if I were them because it shows a credible amount of deterrence, strength, ability to strike Europe if they wanted to, but maybe they don't want to yet open, the box whenever it comes to that. The second part is somebody else did it. You can surmise who exactly would want the war and all of that widening. And the third option is it wasn't a missile, it was a drone or some other sort of alleged attack. Or the fourth, I guess, is that absolutely nothing happened. Remember, there's still an information blackout. We have no satellite imagery. We basically know nothing in the last 5 days or so, unless it came out of Israel or Iran. In the Gulf and everywhere else, even though there's still been attacks, the video is dried up to a trickle. They're threatening to prosecute people for tweeting out videos. So that Diego Garcia one, you might have heard it. Be very cautious with that claim. There is not any real evidence yet that it's actually happened.
So, that is really important to say. The only evidence we have is from the U.S. saying that this occurred. We have no other evidence. There was no strike that actually hit the base. You had one, this is their claim, one that allegedly failed halfway and another one that was intercepted. The Iranians are saying this was not us. That's their claim. And the reason that there's a good cause to be skeptical is because this has immediately given a propaganda talking point to proponents of the war who say, see, the Iranians were lying about the limited range of their ballistic missiles. See, Europe is at risk. Don't you see how we can't believe these people and we have to take them out because they pose a threat to all of the Western world? That's the, what Bibi immediately began pushing. All sorts of, pro-war influencers in the U.S., they all began pushing that talking point. And when you have this, this NATO dude who is a total Trump sycophant, even saying well, we can't actually confirm that it came from Iran, that to me was the biggest red flag of I don't know that this really even went down at all, let alone went down the way that they're claiming it went down. So in any case, possibly Iran has this longer missile range. That would be a very significant development. Or possibly this is all effectively a ruse to provide more justification for a war that is extremely unpopular and to help to cajole the European allies to get in the fight where they've been somewhat resistant thus far. So that's the reason to be really skeptical of these claims until we have anything, more approaching definitive proof.
And the reason why is that things are not going well for Israel right now. And there's every reason in the world to actually want to continue to justify the propaganda effort against Iran. Let's go and put the next one up here on the screen. Let's put B3, please. This was a very significant development that happened over the weekend. Iran said that the U.S. and Israel had attacked the Natanz nuclear facility. There actually have been a very limited amount of strikes, ironically, on the nuclear facilities across Iran. They said that the Natanz enrichment complex was targeted this morning. We don't yet know what any of the actual damage would be. They said, quote, there was no leakage of radioactive material that was reported and no radioactivity material was released. Previously had been targeted by Israel in the 12-day war. Now, the reason why this is very significant is because immediately what followed were massive Iranian strikes in Dimona, where Israel's secret nuclear program is alleged to be. Let's go and put some of the video up here on the screen. I mean, this is shocking stuff, right? Like, not only do you see a ballistic missile just striking deep inside, you also can see multiple instances of interceptors that were failing, not nearly the number of interceptors that originally are launched at some of these ballistic missiles. And you can see the direct strike that happened that was able to penetrate the missile defense systems in Israel. It was immediately followed up by, and let's go to B5 here, where Trey Yingst over at Fox News reported a mass casualty event in the city of Arad in Israel, where at least 100 people were injured. Let's take a listen.
Right now we're here in Arad, where last night an Iranian ballistic missile slammed into a residential area. You can see the amount of destruction here. At least 100 people were injured, according to first responders. You can see the buildings here that were on fire. There is destruction for blocks. Right now, first responders are still combing through the debris, ensuring that there are no unexploded ordnances as Israeli officials arrive here at the scene to survey the damage.
So there you go. That was the report there from Trey Yingst, who was on the ground. I think the two of these things we could take. First of all, the missile that allegedly struck in Dimona, that missile appeared to show some evasive maneuver near the end. This was according to some independent analysis that I saw. That would be some of the more advanced weaponry that the Iranians continue to have. And so what can we take away from that? So they have the ability to target a secret nuclear facility. It's exactly tit for tat. You strike us, we strike you. We're able to penetrate your air defense. We're actually saving some of our more advanced missiles, which you claim 95% have all been wiped out. If you combine it with the alleged Diego Garcia attack, you actually would see a much stronger Iran from where we are when in the last, let's say, 2 weeks before, which would validate some of the analysis that we've heard here on the show about how they had sought to wipe out interceptor stockpiles and then reserve some of the drones and some of the ballistic missiles to target very selectively. And they have the ability to secret nuclear facilities, specific bases, Patriot missile batteries, THAAD interceptors, like any of these places, which are very pinprick strikes, but designed to inflict maximum damage and to deliver a major strategic message. So that's why I think these are very important. Israel very clearly is in a hurt position right now. They do not want to be in a place where their nuclear facility or their cities are taking strikes where they even had to issue an apology to the population in Iran, being like, the interceptor didn't work, we're sorry. I mean, this is not what you saw in the opening days of the war, and it's clearly a sign of desperation. We know for them, I mean, the whole Genghis Khan quote, from Bibi and all that, like, you only know which way that's going to go in terms of their own response. They're going to say, okay, we have to have a total war and try and drag the U.S. into a ground invasion.
Yeah, that's exactly right, which is why it's important to keep in mind, even if Trump does want to taco, it's not only Iran that gets a say in that, it's also apparently Israel. Let's go ahead and put B6 up on the screen. This underscores your point about the messaging coming from the Iranians. They're claiming for the past 3 weeks, our operations were maneuvers to explore the weaknesses of Israeli air defenses. Today, we control Israeli airspace. No one can intercept Iran's missiles. I mean, I think that's, obviously bluster and over the top, but it does appear that as their number of launches have kind of declined to a lower steady state, they're able to inflict more damage. So more of their missiles are finding their targets. Now, also important to underscore, they did not actually hit the nuclear facility in Dimona. Was that intentional? Was it meant more to just send a message of, hey, this is something we could do if we want to. Look how close we're able to strike. Or did it miss its target? That's open question. But, the other thing that I think is really significant here in terms of the Israeli saga is there has been lockdown censorship in Israel about showing some of the damage and showing, these missiles in the sky, et cetera. Now you had, Trey Yingst there on the ground. You had Netanyahu touring some of the damaged sites, talking openly about the level of casualties, et cetera. So there has been a shift in their propaganda approach, which I think is also really noteworthy. And you have to ask, why? What made them decide that they're going to acknowledge some of the damage that has been inflicted and acknowledge some of the civilian casualties? And we'll get to this later. We'll hear more from Netanyahu later about, like, oh my God, the civilians, which is just, you know, to hear that man pretend to care about civilian life is just beyond disgusting. But I do think it's interesting to know. And some people are saying, well, what are they preparing for? You know, what are they trying to prep the ground for by acknowledging these, you know, strikes that did in fact inflict civilian damage and inflict, you know, casualties on civilians there within Israel. So I think that's another important piece of this.
I mean, we're setting the stage here for our eventual conversation about Bibi later on in the show, because obviously he's making crazy claims. They're trying to widen the war. By the way, just came across the wire, despite Trump's TACO, the Israeli Air Force has begun a wave of airstrikes against Iranian infrastructure sites.
Against Israeli infrastructure sites?
Israel has begun a wave of infrastructure targeting in Iran, literally after the Trump TACO. So almost an hour later, the Israeli Air Force is striking Iran. We know that.
Because they had struck their infrastructure
last night as well, and saying they're continuing again this morning. Just to keep everybody, sorry, you know, the show, everything is moving fluid.
Well, and here's the thing. I mean, this is why, like, you know, Trump loves to play this game, and I do think it's the same game as what Biden would play with Israel too, of like, oh, I'm so mad at Bibi, blah, blah, blah. And over again, we get the same thing. And Trump plays the same game. And so, you know, look, it's possible Israel's freelancing, but I think it's more likely that there's a coordination here where Trump wants to keep his hands clean, but still allow the damage to be inflicted on Iran to keep the pressure on and, you know, keep sort of manage the escalation by pretending that he's innocent of whatever the bad Israelis are doing. And, oh my gosh, I'm so mad at them for doing this. But, you know, I would be surprised if they didn't have some sort of green light, or at least not a red light from the U.S. in these type of attacks.
Yeah, exactly. Who knows exactly what's going on? All right, let's get to oil.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.